Welcome back. It is day 7, and today we ask Reddit, what is your scariest I survived story? Story 1. I broke through the ice on a frozen lake in a somewhat isolated place. I had taken precautions to be able to self-rescue, but the quickness with which I went hypothermic was scary. By the time I got to a place where I could get stripped down, my clothes were frozen to frozen solid, and it was becoming difficult to even move. I knew I had mentally rehearsed the exact scenario thousands of times in my head, which probably saved me, but it's amazing how hard it is to think logically when you are freezing to death. That is absolutely terrible, and anybody who lives in a cold state probably knows what it feels like when your limbs just don't cooperate. Story 2. I had chronic back pain, so I took the daily max of Aleve and Advil for it. I did this as daily pain management for maybe 2 years. And then one New Year's Day, I woke up and I didn't feel so good. And then I suddenly felt much worse. A spreading hurt was overtaking my abdomen. I was in pain, and then in minutes, the worst pain. I was in pain beyond comprehension, a cacophony of pain. Pain that was bright, dark, sharp, and hot. Pain that immediately made me forget what it had ever felt like to not be in pain. It progressed from, I don't feel so good, to, I legitimately think I'm dying. A lot of what happened afterwards, I only know from what I was told by my doctors and families. What had happened was, in self-medicating with Advil and Aleve, I'd given myself an NSAID-induced peptic ulcer that had been bleeding, causing severe anemia. Before the ulcer could be diagnosed though, it ruptured, causing digested fluids, which is hydrochloric acid, to leak into my abdominal cavity. This went on as I waited for a transfer to a non-clown show hospital, which would eventually take about 16 hours. For 16 hours, I laid there and digested my own organs. The ulcer leaked fluid that dissolved a hole in my diaphragm, which allowed my pleural cavity to fill up with fluid, collapsing one lung all the way and compressing the other to about 60%. Then, while the ulcer was being repaired, my still uninflated lung adhered to my chest wall and had to be surgically separated. I had 4 abdominal and thoracic surgeries. One lung is still stuck to my ribs. Every deep breath, big laugh, or hard sigh has hurt for the last 7 years, and I will never not be in pain again. That's just horrible. I wish you the best, brother. Story 3. Me and my husband got hit by 2 meth heads who crossed 3 lanes of traffic, causing a head-on collision. If you saw our vehicle after then, you would not believe the passenger, me, survived. The craziest things happen when you're on the road. Story 4. In 2010, I went snorkeling in the Red Sea in Egypt with some friends and my girlfriend at the time. We went to a popular site which was a sunken ferry. Dozens of boats filled with other snorkelers were surrounding the site. About 15 of us jumped off the boat into the water, but because it was so busy, our guide, who was about 19, decided to take us further away from the wreck so that we didn't get mixed up with other snorkeling parties. He took us so far out that we couldn't get back to the boat. It got really chippy and the current washed us about a mile away from the boat. We were treading water for about half an hour. People were panicking, screaming, and trying to climb on top of other people just to survive. I remember turning to the guide who happened to be right next to me and saying, "What should we do?" He just looked at me with a terrified look on his face and said, "I don't know." I resigned to the fact that we were going to die out there. And then, out of nowhere, a passing fishing boat saw us and came to the rescue. It took about 15 whole minutes to get everybody on board, as we were all so exhausted from treading water for so long. He took us back to our boat, and when we got back, the guide got such a bollocking from the captain that I thought it was going to get violent. It was the worst excursion ever. We still can't believe we survived. That's a miracle, my friend. You got saved by the random passing fishing boat. That is a story that you live to tell, so that's awesome. Story 5. When I was home, about 14 at the time, the front door was kicked in. My mom's boyfriend had her by the throat, shoved her into a wall, and proceeded to beat her chest and lungs. I was sat on the stairs hiding the other kids from the situation, just screaming as loud as I could for him to stop. Only for him to draw a blade and threaten me. He kept saying that I was next, as I was the only one who told the police on his actions. If not for the sound of sirens that were coming to our neighbor's house, it might have ended differently. This man had molested me and done numerous things to me on numerous occasions, grooming me into writing him dirty love letters. He drugged my mother, he put my brother in a cage, and he made my sister and I do incestuous things to one another. He even beat us up for slight inconveniences. We only survived because Mom made us pack and move to America in the span of 48 hours. That's absolutely crazy. I don't know if you ever heard the saying where they say if everyone threw their crap in a pile, you would probably want your crap back, because this childhood just sounds absolutely insanity compared to what I had to go through. Story 6. I was climbing a bridge once. I'm an urban climber / explorer, just whenever I have the free time. And this time I wasn't wearing the best shoes for the occasion. I had on some very worn out Jordan, probably 2s. And the bridge is so-called Iron Workers Bridge in Vancouver. If you look up pictures of the underside, you might find what I was walking on. It was a beam, maybe 4 to 6 feet wide, with a cable that runs alongside the beam at about shoulder height that you can grab onto while climbing. I was on my way back up and my foot got caught on a bolt, and I tripped over my right foot with my left, and I just barely caught myself on this cable. Adrenaline was rushing so much at the time I didn't think about it until I got down, but it was a good 60-70 foot drop onto a rocky beach, so it wouldn't have been a pleasant fall. No, it would have not been a pleasant fall. That's correct. Story 7. I laugh about the time I nearly died. It gave me my first nickname in the military, Scarface. Anyways, I was a new airman. I just got to my first base in a foreign country working on fighter jets. These jets are typically loaded with cement missiles for regular training flights on the wingtips. Well, me, being new and excited, I didn't pay attention to where I was standing when I was signaling for the pilot to leave the hangar. I saluted him, turned, then bam, I'm on the ground. My headset and glasses had been flung off, and I was sort of dazed and confused. I ended up getting a cut on my right cheek, a trip to the ER, and was back at work within an hour. The crazy thing is that if I would have been standing a little bit more back, I would have caught one of the missile's fins, which would have sliced my face off. But luckily for me, the tip of the missile, which is bluntish, hit the bottom of my cheek and basically just knocked me over and out. To this day, I have a dimpled smile on the side, and I can say that I survived being hit by a missile. I appreciate your positive outlook. It's awesome. Story 8. I found an unexploded Nazi World War II bomb in my backyard in England. 9-year-old me didn't know what it was, so I decided to scoop it up and take it into the house to show my mom and dad. 4 hours later, we were allowed back into our house after the police and bomb squad removed it, and I was given some free, friendly advice about leaving strange objects where I found them. That is some good advice. Story 9. I'm not entirely sure this counts since I probably couldn't have died, but it definitely felt like I could. I was around 8 or 9, by the way, so here it goes. I got angry and locked myself in my room. By the way, the door locks from the outside for some reason, so I sat on my bed trying to calm down. My sister had this American Girl doll that she set up on the shelf every day that always felt like it was watching me. Of course, it was on the shelf, staring at me. I freaked out and went back to the door to leave, but obviously the door was locked from the outside. But I knew my nieces and nephews were just outside the door sitting at the table, so I asked them to let me out. After no one answered, I looked back at the doll and realized it had fallen off the shelf and onto my bed. There was no wind. But it gets worse. Somehow, the thing was still staring directly at me. I screamed and begged for them to let me out. It took them 2 minutes to get up and do it, but it felt like years. I've been terrified of American Girl dolls ever since. Yeah, I mean, you probably couldn't have died. I mean, you're a child, 8 or 9. Kids' imaginations run insane, so it's probably just one of those moments where you felt like it, but in reality, it was just more of a core childhood memory. Story 10. I was lost in the woods for 2 days when I was 10, and walked and walked and walked and walked until I found a road and fell asleep out of exhaustion and hunger. The police ended up finding me a bit later and delivered me home, where the entire town waited with my mother. That is one of those like small town local news stuff. That's crazy. Story 11. I was on vacation in Fiji for a college class. We were visiting a local village and had free time. I went snorkeling by myself. By the way, I'm a landlubber and knew nothing of ocean safety and riptides. I am swimming face down, looking at the colorful coral reefs, and then when I look up, I am like a mile out to sea, with no one else around. I try to swim back to shore, but the tide is too strong. I have to swim at a 45-degree angle to work my way back against the current. I also had to grab onto some corals and basically do horizontal rock climbing to work my way to shore. By the way, corals are super sharp, and I cut the shot out of my hands. Luckily, I survived. That's just something you learn. You don't swim by yourself, especially in the ocean, unless you're some seriously experienced person. But even then, you don't do it. Story 12. This is actually my father's story, but I'm going to tell it anyways. Before my father had any of us kids, for his summer job, he was basically a lumberjack up here in Canada. He was out there doing his thing and a branch had fallen and hit him in the head. Most likely one that had broken off while cutting down a tree and rested itself in a neighborhood tree. So, there he was, knocked out on the forest floor with nobody around. As he had collapsed, he put a significantly sized cut with his chainsaw into his thigh. He woke up in the middle of the night, limped his way to his truck, and drove himself to the hospital. That's insane. He's lucky he didn't bleed out. Story 13. I was hit by a car. I had a pretty standard concussion amnesia about the event. The last thing I remember was seeing that my bus was already at the stop. I knew that if I hustled, I could catch it. The next thing I remember is struggling to get out from under a cop who was pinning me down and telling me not to move. The ambulance showed up and they put me in a rigid collar to keep me from moving my neck and spine around. I had no idea if I was going to die or not, so the entire ride I joked and talked shot to the EMTs and the cop that rode along. It actually weirded people out that I didn't ask how bad things were. I just wanted to razz on people. All reports were that I was hilarious during the entirety of my hospital stay. My craziest moment by far was when a PA was getting ready to stitch up a large gash in my face. She was injecting lidocaine into the appropriate facial nerves. The first time she injected, I stifled several curse words, and she told me, "You don't have to hold back. Say whatever you want." I replied, "Seriously?" She replied in an affirmative tone and went to do another injection. The moment that it hurt, I blurted out, "Your mother is a bleep." She quickly took the needle out and clarified that I could say whatever I wanted, as long as it didn't make her laugh hard enough to prevent her from doing her job. And by the way, she had a needle incredibly close to an important facial nerve. I randomly met someone who had seen me get hit by the car a month later. They described in detail how my face had smashed into the car hood, how I pinwheeled over the car like a rag doll, and then landed in a way that suggested unconsciousness or death. It was honestly surreal for both of us. Story 14. My dad may either be the luckiest or unluckiest man in the world. About 2 years ago, he was walking in an open field behind our cabin in the mountains when he got struck by lightning. He was the only one at the cabin and called us a few hours later stating that he felt his hair stand up when he saw a bright flash. Next thing he knew, he was picking himself off the ground, sopping wet. His only injury was that his hair was burnt off. Not that he had much anyways. Then, about 6 months later, he was leaving the Ace Hardware and was just down the road from our house. As he got to the truck where he parked, an oil tanker drove by with its hose dragging on the ground. The truck exploded 20 feet from my dad, knocking him down. Fortunately, he escaped unharmed. Unfortunately for the driver, though, he was severely burned. But my dad, being a paramedic, rushed him over, pushing him on the ground and wrapped him in a blanket that he had in his truck. To date, that is the thing that haunted me. The driver's screams were horrible. When my dad was a kid, he was walking through the woods behind his house with a blaze orange vest on. By the way, the woods were a game preserve. A bullet whizzed right by his head. He then noped the F out of there. He was also attacked by a rabid pit bull when walking our dog. Luckily, he had his pistol on him, and he put the pit bull down. And finally, my dad was shot in the back of the head by none other than his own brother. I gotta say, your dad is a complete animal. Like, how does one cheat death so many times? That is crazy. That dude is probably so jaded to to traumatic events. He's like, whatever, let's go, keep chugging. Story 15. My entire family was in a ridiculously lucky car accident when I was 8. We were in a small Datsun station wagon, and a semi-trailer went through a red light and hit us almost directly on the side at about 70 kilometers per hour. The whole side of our car was ripped off as it went past the bull bar of the semi, and me, my sister, and my parents were thrown onto the road as the wagon dumped us out and flipped us off to wrap itself around a pole as an unrecognizable mess. My sister had no injuries, mom and dad had some bruises, and I cut an artery in one arm. My dad says his only memory of it was suddenly having the car wrenched out from underneath him, like he just dropped down and sat still on the road. That is terrifying. Even till this day, when I'm driving down the highway, I seriously dislike driving next to semi trucks for that same reason. I know they're great drivers, are vetted, but they're driving a behemoth of a car. You know, at any moment something can go wrong, and your odds are very light, very slight, I should say. Thank you for tuning in. That is day 7. Please like and subscribe. If you have your own personal story of survival, please go ahead and share it within the comment if you are comfortable doing so. That is all for today. Please hit the bell notification icon to be notified when the next video is released. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.